Assalamu alaikum and a warm welcome to the new live episode of The Bigger Picture. Today's topic of conversation is the United Nations. What does the United Nations do? What has it achieved? And is it still doing the job that it was created for?
Social, finance, employment, transport, welfare, education, careers, health, politics, world peace, disability. This is the bigger picture.
Having just had its 70th anniversary on the 24th of October, on the bigger picture, we'll be discussing the topic of the United Nations. Is it still relevant in today's turbulent world? Does it still have a role to play? Today, with my guests, we'll be examining the united humanitarian work that is being done. And does it validate itself or does it need to change? Moving on today, the people we have in the show today, joining us in the show, we have Dr. Iftikhar Iyaz, who is an OBE, and he is an honorary knighthood in the Queen's birthday honours in the list of 2015 for his services to Tuvalu. And among the many achievements, he's worked with several United Nations organisations such as the FAO, the UNESCO and the UNDP. He's also been closely involved with the international commissions of the ICOP and holds a doctorate in the human development of education. We'll be joining him later in the show. Also, later on the show, we have a number of guests. We have Mike Napier, who has an interesting family history, and I'm sure he'll tell us a little bit more about that. We have Michael Mayhew Arnold, who's a qualified barrister in the international experience, and we have Ari Gaetanis. He's the Chief of New Services section of the United Nations Department of the Public Information. And lastly, we have Farhan Haq. He's the spokesperson for the Secretary General, Kenan Boot. So later on, we'll be meeting with John, and just before that, we'll let you know what's going on in the show. We've got a Twitter feed. Please send us your details on that. So let me just move over to John and have a chat with him and see what he's got in the show. But just before then, we'll run a VT for you, just to let you know what the United Nations structure and how it achieved its goals.
With all the turmoil in the world and the challenges we are facing across the globe, there is one organisation that is looked upon to carry the flag to make sense of it all. Having just had its 70th anniversary, the United Nations is an international organisation formed after the Second World War in 1945. It is currently made up of 193 states. When states become members of the United Nations, they agree to accept the obligations of the UN Charter, which sets out basic principles of the international relations. The power vested in the Charter allows the UN to take action on issues confronting humanity in today's society, such as peace and security, climate change, sustainable development, human rights, disarmament, terrorism, humanitarian and health emergencies, gender equality, food production, and more. The United Nations has no army. It is not a world government, and so cannot make laws. It does, however, provide the means to help resolve international conflicts and formulate policies on matters affecting us all. At the UN, all the members, large and small, rich and poor, with differing political views and social systems, have a voice and a vote in this process. The United Nations has 6 main organs: the General Assembly, the Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, the Trusteeship, and the Secretariat are all based at the UN headquarters in New York. The International Court of Justice is located at The Hague, in the Netherlands.
Well, as I said earlier, we'll be talking to Jonathan Blaine, who is our career advisor. So I thought I'd just ask John, what is it that we're covering today in the programme?
Hi Hanif. We've had some questions in this week, so what we're going to do is we're going to try and address those questions. The first question we've been asked is, should a CV be 1 page or 2 pages? Yeah. And also, if you've got a CV, should you have different CVs for different roles? Also, we've been asked a question, what's it like to work for sort of like a large or a prestigious organisation? And finally, if you want to work for the United Nations, what's the best first thing that you can do?
Fantastic, and that's all very relevant to what we're discussing today. Well, thank you very much. Also on the show, as always, we have our resident cartoonist, and he will be drawing an illustration and something that is in his mind, and he'll come up with something that strikes his imagination. So, Masood, are you ready for today's programme?
I'm ready. Fantastic, yeah.
Yeah, and so you've got some ideas as to what we're discussing today.
Yeah, I'm going to try and portray an image that depicts the importance of the UN to those that depend on it the most.
Okay. Well, let's see how that goes on. Cool. Well, let me start with my guest in the studio. Thank you very much, Sir Iftikhar Riaz, for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
And for us, it's a wonderful experience that you've come today. So I would like to just ask you a question straight away, if that's okay. What successes do you feel that the United Nations has done in the past, 70 years?
Well, obviously, this is a very, very important top of the ladder international organization, which was established after the devastation and destruction of the Second World War. And actually, it's a successor to the League of Nations. And the League of Nations was not very successful to stop the Second World War.
That's right,
coming.
The League of Nations was started after the First World War.
Yes, it was started in 1919.
Yeah.
And then this was actually a creation of President Roosevelt of America. Yeah. And a conference was held in San Francisco in 1942, actually. And then it came into action in 1945. Yeah. Now, this has played a very important, significant role in keeping the world community together.
Yeah, that's right.
When it started, it just had about 51 members. Today, it is 193. Right.
Yeah.
This is almost the whole world. And the important thing is that all these countries have expressed their trust in this institution.
Yeah.
We cannot say that it has been successful in providing the world with the peace and security that the world desires and yearns for even today.
Yeah.
But it has at least held some very important factors which could contribute to a much earlier Third World War. For example, its success in trying to discourage the spread of armament, and particularly trying to restrain the production of nuclear weapons,
that's right.
is a great contribution to peace. It played a very important role, significant role, in trying to diffuse the Cold War. And so it has been moving on in various sections. And as you know, it has so many organs and agencies which are working in different spheres of human development.
Exactly right. So I wanted to ask you a question. In your dealings with, when you worked at Tuvalu, you were also involved with the FAO, UNESCO, and the UNDP. Yes. So tell me a little bit about that as well, and how did that organisation help the situation?
Well, these organisations were there, and they are still there. They have a specific purpose. But unfortunately, we cannot say that they have been very successful because of, A, the United Nations is a highly politicized organization. Yeah. And you can see a very clear demarcation in the United Nations between the industrialized countries and the rest of the world, particularly the G77.
That's right.
Yeah. You know, now that is basically the third world.
And then you've got the G20.
And then you have that.
Yeah.
So obviously, there is a sense, a factor of dissatisfaction amongst that crowd. And particularly the workings of the Security Council have actually particularly in the present times, have brought United Nations under serious criticism because this is not a democratic way. In one sense, United Nations stands for promoting democracy.
Yeah.
And when it comes to its own operations and processes, there is no democracy.
Yeah, and so something that we've been running on Twitter, just encompassing of a lot of what you've just said about the Security Council and the work that it's done. We asked the poll question and we're running it live for the last 24 hours. So we wanted to engage with our audiences on Twitter. And so the question that we had asked them, we had said to them, what do you associate with the United Nations? Is it A, war and conflict? Is it B, peace and stability? And C, is it the humanitarian work? And obviously we gave them an option because it's such a big selection. So we will bring those results later on the show. Yeah. And just following on from that, we did send out our intrepid researchers to go and talk to people on the street and try and get an idea from them what they thought that the United Nations is all about. And so let's see what they had to say, shall we?
A lot of what the United Nations does is outside of the peacekeeping stuff, so I think they've succeeded in, bringing clean water to places that need clean water. They do things like recording indigenous languages, so it's a lot of the things outside of, I think, what most people think of the United Nations.
Well, I know that it's an organization international in order to keep the peace in the world and a little bit with political influence, to keep a little bit all the countries in a meetings for the global decisions.
I know it's kind of around human rights and international labour treaties, but the specifics of how it works, I don't really know. I don't know. I don't think it's very transparent. So I think as a citizen, you want transparency in government organisations, and I think it's not. I don't know who it's accountable to. I don't know who the United Nations is accountable to.
United Nations tries to keep peace and mediate and make peace in the world.
They've been helping a lot of underprivileged children and helping them with school and food and just helping them out.
I associate a lot of frustration, I think, a lot of difficulty in trying to maintain peace in a world which sometimes doesn't necessarily want it. But I do associate it with good intentions.
Like different politics in the meeting, like talking about all the problems around the world. That's what comes to my mind, if I think about it.
For me, the main thing I associate with the United Nations is the human rights.
I think it has done some peacekeeping operations in various places. Usually after wars are over, but like, Rwanda maybe.
So, Iftikhar, there's some very interesting views.
Sure.
And that just depicts exactly how vast the United Nations is.
Definitely it is. You see, one very important element which has contributed to its failures and the frustrations of the people is that it has not realized the importance of justice in its doings.
Exactly right. And that's a very poignant point with our next guest on the phone. I would like to introduce to you Mike Napier. He's a graduate who has a degree in English literature, and he worked as a social worker and a probation officer dealing with high-risk offenders. And Mike's family has a history of pacifists to which he describes. His grandfather was imprisoned through the First World War for his beliefs, and his father came from a military background, and he went to Sandhurst Military Academy. But he left after a breakdown because he rejected the violence that was being taught. And I'm sure we will explain more about that later on in the future. So Mike, just one interesting factor. Can you hear me at the moment?
Yes, I can. Thank you,
Yeah. Mike, thank you very much. Mike, when we were talking, we did realise that you've met our community before, haven't you?
Yes, I have. I was doing some tree planting at the Heartwood Forest, and I just arrived, and there was a group of, I think, about 40, 50 people from your community who were there for the tree planting, and in fact, they stopped for prayer just after I planted my first tree, and out of respect, really, I stopped the work I was doing and observed or listened to what they were doing, and then, in fact, I talked to a couple of the people there came and spoke to me, and talked about the values that they espoused of peace and a sense of community, and the tree planting they were doing all fitted in with what they believed in, and they were very welcoming. They actually invited me to join them for lunch. But,
and I'm sure you did.
Planted one tree, and I only had about an hour to complete what I was doing. I regretfully said I better get on with my tree planting, so that I felt that I actually achieved something on that day.
Okay, well, I'm actually really pleased that you had the chance to meet some of our community outside of the bigger picture today. But one question I did want to ask you is, how important is the humanitarian work of the United Nations?
Well, the humanitarian principles established by the United Nations set a standard for how we should live and how we should take responsibility for those who are more vulnerable and less advantaged. The 8 Millennium Development Goals agreed in 2000 set an admirable agenda for seeking to develop basic standards and a fairer world. Some progress has been made, and careful monitoring reinforces what needs to be achieved. There have been notable successes, such as the role of the World Health Organization in combating polio, smallpox and leprosy. And we value the capacity of the United Nations to respond to floods, famine and other disasters.
Yeah, and also, Mike, just wanted to interject. So in terms of the disasters that we talk about, and we have seen some disasters in the history of the world in most recent times, one that just obviously ended the Second World War. So one thing I wanted to ask you was, do you believe that the threat of the nuclear deterrent in the world is relevant based on the sort of conflicts and the wars that we're seeing around today?
Nuclear weapons would have little use or relevance in many forms of modern conflict. The threats we face are now very different and more complex. Risks often come from single individuals within a dispersed organisation or from cyber attacks. When would we or others ever use a nuclear weapon? Hopefully never.
Yeah, I can see that totally, and that is something that also resonates with me and our community as well. So obviously, thank you very much for that answer, and I'm sure we'll see each other again in the future. Hopefully, maybe in the next spring when we do the tree planting. But thank you. What you said resonates with us as much as it does with everybody else. Thank you very much, and I hope to talk to you again. So, Iftikhar, how important is the humanitarian work of the United Nations?
It's extremely important. You see, the one good thing is that the United Nations provides a forum, an organization, a media, through which the services, when there is a disaster or such things, can be provided immediately.
Yeah, and not only just the disasters, there's other things, other sort of implications as well.
True.
And waiting on the phone as well, we have one of our guests. He's a qualified barrister. His name is Michael Maher Arnold, and he's an ex-CEO of an offshore bank in the Caribbean. He's written a book about how to deal with difficulties in your life. He's also a member of the NUJ, and also he lives in Cyprus, and he's well aware of the role played by the United Nations in keeping peace, because there is this buffer zone that is being maintained in that area, which we all know. And for most of his life, when I was speaking to him, he's been spending it in legal advice, both in senior counsel, both foreign and domestic, on matters involving complex cross-international sort of litigation and disputes. So I have a question for Michael. Michael, welcome to the programme today.
Hanif, hello, good evening. Thank you for having me on the show.
Oh, no, you're more than welcome. As we've seen recently with the attacks in Paris, France declared itself in a state of emergency. Could you kind of shed some light on how this is applicable from a legal perspective?
Yeah, sure. I mean, most countries actually, of course, when they're under threat or some kind of state of emergency, or consider themselves to be under immediate threat, or where government is going to be interrupted or the establishment is going to be interrupted,
yeah.
Particularly by terrorists or war or whatever it is, will declare a state of emergency. In France, they have, if I remember rightly, and I'm not a French lawyer, but if I remember Article 16 of the Constitution allows the President to go and ask for exceptional measures and to declare a state of emergency from between 30 and 60 days. And he will normally go in front of Parliament to ask for it, and I believe that they've just asked for an extension for a further 3 months. It's quite interesting for the French because they actually originally the law originated really in 1961 when there was the police shot about 200 people, 200 protesters in Paris, and before that the Algerian War of Independence.
That's
so,
right.
and under their constitution, it's quite important, and that's actually spread out to Belgium and other places.
Yeah.
And
Mike,
of course,
Mike, can I just ask you a question? When a country goes into special measures, to what extent, what can they do to protect themselves?
Well, I suppose what they do is twofold. It's always a balance. First of all, they take away rights that would normally apply to people in their ordinary lives. So, for example, whereas I might want to go down to the corner shop, whereas I might want to go to the airport and travel to certain places, and so on and so forth, that right will probably be reduced simply because of the state of emergency and because the government thinks that they are protecting me. On the other hand, the human rights groups will say, well, our human rights have been taken away from us, and they are reduced. So always there is this balance between, and governments nowadays, particularly because they're very much in the media focus and also in interrelated media.
Yeah, I mean,
will not want to continue it longer than they can, longer than is necessary.
So Mike, just one very, very quick question, and I'd like you to reply very quickly, is what are the advantages in legal terms of having an organisation like the United Nations?
Without the United Nations is, in a nutshell, a talking forum. If we didn't have a forum where a structured forum where people could go and talk, there would be much more fighting. There would be much more upheaval in the world than there is at the moment.
So based on what you've said, and I can understand it, so ultimately the United Nations takes the sting out of a conflict.
Yes, it does. And it puts itself actually in a buffer zone. Sometimes...
Well, brilliant. Well, thank you very much for that, Michael. It's really good to talk to you. It's good to know that there is a legal framework out there that where there's some protection for various things. Well, thank you very much. Just moving on now, we'd like to talk about our press highlights. This is what the world has been talking about in the news today. So in the Times, the United Nations approved the resolution on the impact. That's one of the articles that we spoke about. And then we have the Times magazine. That's how the world is improving the children's health. And we discussed this earlier, didn't we? And that's one of the sort of articles that you wanted to speak about. And then we have the BBC News. News. This is 70 years of changing the world. Then we have The Guardian that we discussed, 70 years of $500 billion later. What has the UN achieved? And the UN News Centre itself is what stands together. There is no limit on what can be achieved. And also we have The Guardian reflecting on collective failure of the United Nations. And lastly, The Independent, Syria civil war, the UN's taking control of the country. And that could provide a conflict to the solution. So what I'll do now is, I know we discussed earlier, I'll let you just have a review of the newspapers there and maybe just pick one or two of those and see. So I'm just going to go and talk to our resident career advisor and have a chat with him. Well, thank you very much. Thank you. John, thank you very much. Just while the programme's been going on, I know we talked a little bit about what we were going to talk about. We've had a question come in from Nadia Chaudhry, and she emailed in with this question for yourself, really, and she's looking for some advice. And she says, one major problem is that having a degree in today's climate means that either you're too qualified or you don't have enough real-world experience in the job. And what advice could you give?
Well, firstly, I'd like to say well done for giving us that question. I think it's absolutely bang on the nail. This is a question that's facing lots of people. And actually, only 3 weeks ago, I just agreed to work in partnership with the University of Reading to actually come up with game-changing strategies about how you can address this issue. But the bottom line is, I think that the last time I was looking at the statistics, there are something like, in the UK, 60 applicants for every single job. And it seems desperately unfair. On the one hand, they say you're overqualified. On the other, they say you don't have the experience.
So what advice would you give then?
Well, I think that you've got to find employers that want to hire graduates, and there are plenty of those. Of course, it very much depends on what degree you've got, from what university, what grades, and what sort of sector you're in. I think that if you're in a situation where there are jobs for graduates, it's a matter of competing. In those situations, they know you haven't got the experience. They're not necessarily saying that you're overqualified. In situations where that's not the case, I think you've got to look for that added value. It's all about difference. It's all about bringing something else to the table. And I feel it's desperately unfair. These days in the UK, graduates are investing something like £50,000 in getting their degrees, but that makes you the same. So you've got a degree, I've got a degree, so it's a matter of bringing something else to the table. And interestingly enough, what employers value the most is attitude, mindset. So what you've got to do is you've got to try and sell your attitude, sell your mindset, sell your difference.
Yeah, and you can do that, we talked about earlier, in CV writing, I guess, because that's one of the other questions that have come in. I mean, John, very briefly, just say to us, is it a one-page or a two-page? How should a CV be done?
Well, CV starts with a blank sheet of paper like this, doesn't it? I feel absolutely passionate about CVs. You know, I've got here like an audio program that I've created. I've done something like 12 hours of video training. This is a dictionary, you know, great chunky dictionary full of words. You put the words onto the page and it can change your life. It can get you the job. Now, to address these questions, should it be one page, should it be two page? If you're young and you're starting out, it should be a page. The more senior you get, the more history you got, it can move on to 2 pages. In fact, it's quite okay to go up to 4 pages if you're an experienced person. And if you're, say, a chief exec of a FTSE 100 company, then you can have a much longer one. But what it's got to do is, it's not so much the length, it's got to be as short as possible, but you've got to say enough in it.
Brilliant. That sounds fantastic. Well, thank you very much for that, John. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that. So just wanted to just let you know that we are running a competition, as you know, as we always do in the programme. And we have a VT that explains what's going on there.
We would like to hear your views and thoughts on this topic. Tweet us at The Bigger Pic using the hashtag MTA_TBP, or send us an email on thebiggerpicture@mta.tv. Our social media team is excited to read your responses to our discussions. We'll also be sharing your tweets, answering some of your questions. Before we go to our guests, we have one question for you. If you get it right, you can win a prize. Tell us, how many permanent members are in the United Nations Security Council? A. 15, B. 5, C. 12. Please send in the answer via Twitter or email.
Well, brilliant. So please send in your answers to those questions. And also on the phone, we have Ari Gaitanis from the United Nations in New York. He is the Chief of News Service Section in the United Department of Public Information. And he's previously served with the United Nations in Lebanon, Somalia, Afghanistan, Thailand, and the list goes on. Welcome to the program, Ari.
Hello, Hanif. Hello, everybody.
Yeah, no, thank you. Ari, I'm sure you're at the front end of the United Nations. You're running at the front line for the United Nations. So tell me, one of the things that we spoke about, you recently were in Afghanistan, weren't you, for the elections? Can you just tell me a little bit about that?
That's right. Well, the UN was there in Afghanistan to help support the elections. The Afghans, they were the ones in charge, were the ones that helped support them and help him make those happen. It was an intense 2 years, living in pretty dire or pretty tough circumstances for all the UN staff, let alone, of course, for the people of Afghanistan. Having said that, I've got to say, even though it was tough and pretty rough on some days with the attacks and everything else, in the end, the elections were held, and there was a result, and there was a government that was formed, and the UN was happy to be part of that process.
Yeah, and that's obviously the ultimate aim, is to get a conclusion for what you're trying to do out there.
Exactly right. Unfortunately, what makes bigger news or better news in some ways is the things where things don't always come together. But there are those success stories or those positive achievements, which I think don't get the same attention like that.
Yeah, Ari, in relation to that, what would you say the United Nations could do to be more effective in the world today?
Well, Hanif, I would almost say that it is effective. The only thing is that, as I said before, sometimes it doesn't get the attention or the love for those achievements. But, keep in mind that even though it is effective in many ways, it's always trying to adapt to the world around us. So it's always looking for new ways, to do what it does even better, whether it's a new approach or a different approach, whether it's sending through peacekeepers or peace negotiations. The UN will use whatever tools it has to help get that conclusion.
Well, that's fantastic. And obviously there's organisations such as the UNHCR and the UNHRC, and these are all very important subjects that really hold the flag for the United Nations.
Well, Hanif, there's pretty much a UN body for most facets of life. People, I think, a very minor example is that, the reason or the way that, you receive your mail in the post box these days is thanks to a UN body sitting down many, many years ago to work out, okay, how's the best way to get mail from country A to country B? So that's one minor example. And of course, you have, as you said before, UNHCR and the rest, which focus on the bigger issues, to put it that way, whether it's refugees, whether it's human rights. The whole gamut of life in some ways is covered, and to some extent, by some UN body somewhere or some UN office somewhere.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for that insight, and it was very useful to our audiences, and I'm sure they would have appreciated what it said. And I hope to speak to you again in the future.
Anytime, feel free, please.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Arin. I look to talk to you again soon. Bye for now. So let's see how Masood has been getting on with his drawing. We've not had a chance to come to you. It's been quite hectic. Can we have a look at what you've done so far?
Here you go.
So how's it going? So explain that to us a little bit more.
So currently I'm trying to depict several hands reaching out. I'm going to add the logo of the UN at the top, portraying that these hands are reaching out to the UN for help, pleading to them. But at the same time, they're losing hope, so the hands are melting. Okay. But also, of course, the value of the UN is greater than the distrust that people have. Mm-hmm. So there's still people reaching out to it regardless. Well,
that's really interesting. So. So that's a fantastic. So it's really, really good to know, and I'm sure we'll come back to you later on in the show. So we also have. Thank you very much, Farhan Haq. He's the spokesperson for the Secretary General, joining us today. Farhan, thank you very much for being with us today.
Oh, thank you.
No, that's excellent. We've been discussing about the United Nations 70 years since it was established in 1945. What I'd like to just ask you, there are so many challenges facing United Nations, and in particular we hear about South Sudan, and obviously we're hearing about the crisis in Syria. What are the key areas you feel that the United Nations should be involved with?
Well, the United Nations is involved in any number of areas, whether it has to do with peace and security, with humanitarian aid, with support for human rights, or with support for development or efforts to deal with climate change and other common problems that all the countries face. Ultimately, the United Nations is useful as a way of binding together all of the countries of the world to forge a united front in dealing with problems in common. So if there's a crisis in a specific country, such as the ones you mentioned in South Sudan or in Syria, what we can do usefully is make sure that the nations of the world can try to forge a common approach to dealing with the issue. In Syria, this has proved extremely hard, and so what we're trying to do there is get the parties themselves to come to talks, hopefully by the 25th of January of this month, so that we can forge a way after 5 years of bloodshed.
Yeah, fantastic. So do you think that's achievable?
What our history shows is that anything is achievable if there's willingness among the key member states of the United Nations to agree on a way forward. If the main countries of the world, the main countries in the Middle East region, or other powers such as the United States, Russia, France, the United Kingdom, and China, if they are not willing to come together and forge a common front, then the things we deal with become much more difficult. But you can see in crisis after crisis that there are many things, including, for example, climate change, on which countries are willing to take bold steps for their own common benefit. So when that happens, we can move forward.
Brilliant. And that's really good.
Difficult for now.
Yeah, I mean, that's really good to know, and it shows that the UN really has an important role to play in the world today. Farhan, thank you very much for that insight, and I really look forward to speaking to you again in the future. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome, thank you. So, Saif Iftkhar, so which articles did you choose to discuss out of what we talked about?
Well, they are all very interesting, but a very interesting thing that has come up is the Jordan resolution about involving youth in the world affairs.
Yeah, and that was from which magazine?
This is
it was The Guardian.
Yeah, I think it's probably The Guardian.
Yeah,
yes,
that's correct.
Yeah. But the important thing is that this is a very serious realization at this time because of the threats of terrorism around the globe. And the United Nations is very particular that the youth population of the world should be harnessed and educated so that they can become useful members of their own communities and the world community rather than engaging in anti-peace activities.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, that's fantastic. So, as you know, we were running the poll. Anyway, that article that you discussed is absolutely really essential to what we're doing, and obviously the HRC is very involved in that aspect. So now the time has come where the poll that we're running has finished, and so what we do, I believe we've got the results already, so we can see that on screen, can we? So the question that we asked in the poll was, what do you associate with the United Nations? Look, it's 41 peace. So it seems like the United Nations is actually at least getting the message across.
True, the message is there. The message is positive and negative as well.
Yeah.
There are concerns about the workings of the Security Council.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, as you would know, since the inception of United Nations, 37 resolutions to bring justice to Palestine and give them their rights have been vetoed by the United States.
Yeah.
You see. And there have been other very important resolutions about the rights of people in Kashmir, in Korea, and other places, which have been vetoed as well. And some of the resolutions were adopted, but they have not been, the United Nations has not been able to carry them out.
And who do you think is blamed for that?
I think this is the political nature of the organization, where a country feels that a certain move is going to damage or harm or reduce their importance in the world community. They just veto the decision.
Okay.
And this is the reason why there are so many conflicts which are not being or getting resolved in the world today.
Yeah, so for every one conflict that doesn't get resolved, we have some conflicts that do get resolved. So there is a journey that's taking place. So anyway, well, thank you very much for that answer. So as you know, let's reveal the person who won the question to the answers. As you know, that we've been running a question to win this the mug here, and the question that we asked was how many permanent members are in the United Nations Security Council, which is exactly to what we were just talking about.
Exactly,
so do we know which is the answer? Let's reveal that, shall we? So it's 5. So well done to those who got that answer correct. And we've been told, so there is, if I could ask you, again through algorithms, just to pick a number between 1 and 3, just to see, and then by that, through that algorithm, we're able to work out from all those people who sent in the right answer. So would you like to pick a number?
2.
2, okay, right down the middle. So the name of the person who won? Okay, Rebecca, so thank you, well done for that, and that's brilliant, thank you very much. And so well done, Nadiba Bajwa, for that, thank you very much. So what I'd like to move on with is just really just give a little bit of a conclusion to understand what it is that we've been talking about. So as long as we understand and appreciate the United Nations and its organisation, it has many different attributes and elements to it. And learning the way in which the world is administered is something that we should all understand and reflect upon, because these are the elements that actually affect us in our day-to-day life. The world today, sadly, there's always war somewhere, and somebody is always affected more than others in the world. So I'd just like to end by saying, look, Islam teaches us the way that we should always act upon. And I would say that we should always use those 2 words, which is honesty and integrity. So here's a selection of quotes that we thought that might just interest you and give you a bit more thought and insight into the workings of the United Nations.
More than ever before in human history, we share a common destiny. We can master it only if we face it together. And that, my friends, is why we have the United Nations. Kofi Annan. The United Nations is designed to make possible lasting freedom and independence for all its members. Harry S. Truman. Thus shall we live, because we will have created a society which recognizes that all people are born equal, with each entitled in equal measure to life, liberty, prosperity, human rights and good governance. Nelson Mandela. Islam strongly emphasizes the need to always act in a fair and just manner. It teaches that no party should be given preferential treatment or favored unduly. It should be that a wrongdoer knows that if he tries to act unjustly towards any country, no matter its size or status, he will not be allowed to do so by the international community. If the member states of the United Nations, the countries that derive benefit from the European Union, and the countries that are under the influence of the big powers, or even the underdeveloped countries, all come to accept this, then, and only then peace can emerge. Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmad, Khalifatul Masih V.
Well, thank you for preparing those quotes, and I'm sure that there is something which you can ponder on and reflect on. So what I'd like to do is show you the final illustration that Masood has created. So Masood, let's have a look. So let's see what your final illustration is. Interesting. So just explain that to us.
So, like I said before, you've got the hands reaching out to the United Nations. Obviously, the United Nations has not been so helpful in the recent years. That's why the hands are melting off, but there's still hope for it.
And I think exactly what you described earlier, you've illustrated.
Yeah, of course. That's why I added
drawing.
That's why I added the quote by Nelson Mandela.
Yeah, brilliant. Do you want to just read that quote for us?
A nation should not be judged by how it treats its highest citizens, but its lowest ones.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you very much there. And obviously, and also thank you to all of our viewers for watching and getting involved with our conversations today, both through email and Twitter. And with no doubt, the conversations will continue online. And congratulations to our winner for winning the competition. And the prize, inshallah, will be with you soon. So please do join us next time when we'll be discussing awareness of the disability. How much do you know about disability? Do you feel it is easy to talk to someone who has a disability? Do you feel there's enough information on how to help cope with being disabled? Well, tune in to The Bigger Picture live Tuesday, the 19th of January at 8:30 p.m. to find out more. And don't forget to share your views and your questions related to this subject, and also sending in questions to our career advisor on Twitter at MTA BiggerPic, and then email us at thebiggerpicture@mta.tv. Well, that's all we have time for today. And it's goodbye from me, and a big thank you to Sir Iftikhar Ayaz.
Thank you very much, and thanks to your audience as well.
No, thank you. Exactly right. Now it's goodbye from us here in London and all of our viewers around the world. Assalamu alaikum.